Thank you very much, Ames. Okay, I am known to go long, so I'm going to start a timer. As Elizabeth Taylor said to her husbands, I'll be brief. I have to tell you, listening to the messages today, it's been laid on my heart to give a little bit of a different talk than what I had first intended. So go with me here, because I'm not quite sure how this will end up. But and before I get into the thick of it, I want to thank Ames and Dama for putting this together. I tell you what, it does a person's heart good to see love of state and country and fellow citizen enough to pull this together. So thank you. Thank you. You know, a lot's been going on in the story of True the Vote. There's some important things that I want to share fundamentally about our program, but there's some bigger picture things too. And in the context of what we've heard today thus far, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming, doesn't it? It's just your head's kind of spinning. I mean, you hear all the right things and you know how it should be going, but it's not. And where do you jump in? And how can it be possible that we're so close to the edge and we won't go over? I'll tell you how I sleep at night. In 2009, God wiped his hand across this country and said, I'm going to wake you up. And millions of people, now there were millions of you, and I'm sure millions of you sitting out there that were, or some of you sitting out there, that were already in the battle. But there were millions of us, me included, who were not. We were very comfortable living our lives of convenience. But something clicked in me and in millions of other people in 2009, and that, you know, we talked about, Ames referred to the statistical probabilities of having a governor of a Democrat affiliation that many times in a row. Well, the statistical probability of having millions of people wake up overnight and start something called a Tea Party when there had been no marketing, no real organized effort. It just sprung up from inside the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the hand of God. That is the hand of God. And don't believe for a second that he doesn't have big plans, because he does not do anything accidentally, right? We are living in days of history and miracles, and we are privileged, all of us here, to have been chosen to be a part of these times for very specific purposes. And we may not be many in number, but God has a thing for remnants, doesn't he? So I think we're going to be just fine. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to where I got to and where I think we're headed. My story starts in 2008. I kind of watched the presidential debates unfold. That was a real turning point for me, because I heard the questions that were being asked, and it just, something was off. We were focusing on who had the best one-liner, who had the best hair, and we were not thinking about what we were going to do to get our fiscal house back in order. The fact that government was encroaching beyond a place that any of us could have ever imagined possible, not just but a few decades earlier. And so I got involved because the Tea Party started. And to me, the Tea Party sounded like it was going to be a bunch of people that didn't really know a whole lot about what was going on, but wanted to do something. I fit right into that category. Don't know a whole lot about politics, still don't, I would submit. My husband and I started an oil field services company 6 months after we got married. We make component oil field parts. I know oil field, as we say in Texas. I know metallurgy. I know how deeply you can put a piece of tooling down before it combusts. That's the kind of stuff I know. I had no idea about the political awakening that was about to wipe over me. So I got involved in the Tea Party and went to my first rally. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you have been to Tea Party rallies back in the day? All right. My brothers and sisters. All right. I can remember going to the store for the first time in my probably adult life and buying poster board and glitter paint for the purposes of making a poster that said, "Cut the pork." And I thought that was fiendishly clever. And went to the rally, and we held our sign, and looked to my left and looked to my right, and I asked the people around me, "Have you ever done anything like this before?" "No." "Have you?" "No." "What are we going to do next?" "I don't know." "What do you think we should do?" "I don't know." "Cut the pork." But there was just a little nucleus of us among thousands who were gathering in Harris County, Texas. There was a little nucleus of us that decided to get together and talk about what we could do that would make a possible, sustainable, lasting difference. And we had heard that there was a need for people to go and work at the polls. We thought we can do that. Simple enough, right? We'll work at the polls, and at the end of the day, we'll check that off our list, and we'll move on to something else. But what happened that day really is the reason I'm here. What happened was we saw something that we could not forget. We saw people who would come in with multiple registration cards in different names. We saw people who would come in and say, "I don't know who to vote for," and then the election judge would not tell them how to operate the machinery, but in fact inform them how to vote straight party, or how to vote if their hand was, we vote on machines, electronic machines in Texas. If their hand was going slightly askew, suggest to them that they might want to rethink that choice. We heard all of this, and at the time, we had no idea what our recourse was. And so we came back together as a group, compared notes, found that there were some similarities that we could not overlook, and knew that we must do something. Now, that was kind of a spiritual marker for me, because God put that right there in front of us and said, "You have two choices. You can close your eyes and pretend you didn't see it, or you can do something about it." And how often, ladies and gentlemen, in your own lives, do you see something, you see injustice, you see something fundamentally wrong, and you say, "Man, I hope somebody does something about that"? We talk and we talk and we talk and we talk. There are so many ways for citizens to be engaged, and don't underestimate the power of citizen engagement, because as you heard Nancy say, the power of one written letter, it can have a ripple effect that you would never believe possible. But it's just because it happens so rarely that we really step out of our comfort zone and say, "You know what? If I don't do something, I'm a part of the problem. I'm complicit." And I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, I have two young children. This is not gonna happen on my watch. I'm not gonna hand this country falling apart to my children. All right. So we started True the Vote, and we decided that the first thing we would do we would be setting out now to go and register voters. Quick show of hands, how many of you have ever registered voters? Okay, you know that is a true labor of love. You work long, hard hours, and oftentimes for very, very little fruit, if you will. So we started out, we were registering voters in front of gun shows, which again we thought was fiendishly clever. No one has ever thought to register voters in front of gun shows. So, but every little victory, right? So we were out there not having a great amount of success, and all of a sudden, headlines were being made by a group that came to town called Houston Votes. Houston Votes said that they were going to get 100,000 new voters registered in the matter of just a few months. And we thought, unless they found a lost civilization somewhere that we're unfamiliar with, we're not quite sure where those people are coming from. And so we thought, okay, let's break this apart to its most base component parts. If you think that there's something happening by way of documentation, that documentation is being turned over to our county, what can we do to check it out for ourselves? So we began filing what we call in Texas open records request, which is essentially a FOIA. We wanted to see what was being turned in. And as we were getting back thousands of these hard copies of voter registration applications, we began to notice very disturbing patterns and trends that suggested that, in fact, there was foul play afoot. That there were essentially, by their own admission, 5 or 6 registrars, deputy voter registrars, who will single-handedly registering 5,000 and 6,000 and 7,000 people a week. I mean, you talk about the blisters you must have on your hand from registering that many people in a week. But there were other inconsistencies, applications where people had checked, I'm not a citizen, and then they would go on to be registered to vote. Applications where the name at the top of the line when they started the application, and I guess trying to get 100,000 in is just a dizzying undertaking because by the time they would get to the bottom of the application, the name would be different. So we turned all these things over. Okay, we turned them over. The county said, yes, we see that we have a problem. They held a press conference. Now this is important to the story because it really gets to where the roller coaster starts to take off. Hang there with me. They call a press conference, and the tax assessor collector, that's who runs our elections in Harris County, banged his fist on the podium in front of the television cameras and said, we are not going to have this happen in Harris County. We are not going to let this acorn-type operation take over and bloat our voter rolls. But it was very well known that the way he got that evidence was through our group. Okay. You think that's the happy ending, right? I mean, that group was turning in 1,000 applications a day, and that went down to 20 a week. So something was up, right? But that's not the end of the story. That is, in fact, just the beginning. Because that incident, that press conference, happened on a Tuesday. Press conferences from the other side, from Houston Votes, who was, of course, going to refute everything that had been said about them, those were called to be held on a Friday. Well, our group had all gotten on a plane and gone to Washington, D.C. for a Glenn Beck rally. So we're all in D.C. We hear that there's been a counter press conference called, so now we have to call a remote counter press conference, which becomes a little logistically challenging, but nonetheless, that morning, Friday morning, all of Harris County's election equipment was burnt to the ground. 10,000 machines, $30 million worth of equipment, all of the collateral materials. So I'm at the rally, and I get these texts, oh, my Lord, everything's on fire. And we were at the rally with our children. And, like good parents, we had taken them out to have the experience of being at this rally, and then the one last day before we left to take them back to school, we were going to see all of Washington, D.C. in like 5 hours. We were going to go drag them to every possible monument. And so my daughter was running up the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and I get a phone call, and it's a number that I don't recognize, and I let it go to voicemail. And later on, I check it. Well, it was the editor of the Huffington Post. Now, mind you, this was a little small, countywide operation. We weren't bothering anybody. But the editor of the Huffington Post had called and wanted to know about the fire and wanted to know how we were involved with that. Well, I didn't return the call because I had no idea how to handle media at the time. I just felt like maybe I should just, step out and hope it would pass me by. But lo and behold, the HuffPo editor still printed an article. And when you went to read it, they called us, and I quote, the largest voter suppression effort ever in the history of the country. And it was like a starter's pistol had gone off. Now, that happened in August of 2010. The previous month, July of 2010, we had filed our nonprofit application. Timing is everything, right? Speaking of which. All right, let me pick up speed here. We had filed our nonprofit application. And so at the time, we didn't necessarily connect that any of this would play out on a bigger stage. We just were going on our way. The new Black Panthers got involved. I mean, it was quite the three-ring circus there for a while, but we were focused, and the reason we should all in this tent here today remain focused on doing the next right thing. Don't get so caught up in the big picture of all that's wrong. Just do the next right thing, because there is, again, no reason for me to even be on the stage if it were not but by the hand of God. That's it. So just do the next right thing, because God will open that door or window exactly when it's supposed to open. And so we just kept walking through those doors and windows, and then the FBI started showing up, the domestic terrorism unit, asking questions about people that were coming to our programs. And at the time, we said, oh, what we can help you with. We're glad to tell you anything we can, within reason, because we thought that they were there for our protection, and maybe they were. Oh, what we now know. So in January, now we're 6 months into filing this application. Now we're still doing all of our True the Vote stuff right now. I mean, now because of the fire and because of the notoriety that HuffPo has caused, and everybody sort of dogpiled on, all of the leftist cabal at that point all had great things to say about me. In fact, one of my most chilling memories is my daughter bounding down the stairs one morning, and she said, Mom, we have our current events report due today, and guess who I did my current events report on? Who, Mom? You. Great. Where did you get your reference material? Huffington Post. No, honey. No. Mommy's not a racist. So we're doing our bit. We're going out, and now all of a sudden people are contacting us from all over the country saying, you saw that in your hometown? We saw that too. Can we work together? And we said, sure, we don't know what we're doing. Come on. Let's all work together. Let's figure this out together. And that's how it starts, right? That's how we find our way back, is just starting. And so we were just doing what we could, and then the IRS shows up in my personal life. My husband and I, as I say, had a small manufacturing company, and they audited us for 2 years' worth of our returns. That's fine. Sometimes you draw the short straw. But then they audited us personally for 2 years of our tax returns. Again, another really short straw. The straws are just going to keep getting shorter. When that audit happened, we have a small farm. They wanted to come out to our farm. They wanted to count our cattle. They wanted to see the new fence line we had put up. We're not talking about just a passing by audit. We're talking about a real investigation. But that's not all. We had OSHA come out on a surprise visit when neither my husband or I were at the shop, demand to speak to our employees, and then proceed to do a exhaustive audit. That was followed now on the day after the election by the Texas branch of the EPA, the TCEQ, that came out because an anonymous complaint had been called in. And to mix in another agency, we had a license to make gun parts. We didn't make them, but we had the license. Well, BATF showed up in 2012, showed up to do an audit. Again, that's fine. All these things are within their rights, right? But again, to Ames's point, the statistical probability of all of these things happening all at once that's a real short straw. So they came out. Well, then they came out again. They came out a second time back in April. And it was at that point that I said enough is enough. Because we could then count over the last 3 years, prior to my filing of that nonprofit application, we had never had any government interest in us whatsoever. We filed our tax returns, and that was it. Filing that nonprofit application and then getting on their radar in the way that we did apparently posed a pretty significant threat. And to date, we've had 2 lawsuits filed against us, which is a whole nother story, plus all of the investigations and audits, 18 different points of contact. Now, while all this is spinning in my personal life, and I'm not telling anybody about this because I just want to keep focused on what we're doing with True the Vote. The rest of it, I hope, would just work itself out. I never imagined that Providence would have it, that these scandals would break in the way that they did. But all the while, the IRS continues to send questions to our organization, to True the Vote. So now we've answered, at this point, about 300 questions. We've submitted thousands of pages in documentation. We still don't have our nonprofit application. But it was after BATF came out the second time that I called to our attorney and I said, you know what? No more. No more. They have crossed a line. We're suing them. We're suing every single one of them. How do we do it? So, you know what's funny is that my phone keeps timing out. It goes back to its home screen, and I think that every time it does that, the timer stops, so I really have no idea how long I've been up here now. All right, so we sued the IRS 2 months ago, served Lois Lerner at home, which was a sweet, sweet moment. And that's, of course, they're going to slow roll that, there's no question. But it is a solid case. We have standing. They cannot dismiss it. It will lead to discovery. And we will keep this on the front lines. We will keep it out there. But what does it mean to think about a private citizen that has had this happen in their lives? I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, it means that now we are entering into a phase where we are seeing the intentional weaponization of our government. We are seeing collusion among federal agencies to single out private individuals. Let me say this. For all of you watching at home, and if you post this on YouTube, for all of you there that will try to set me up to sue me again, let me say this. You have picked the wrong chick. I'm not here because I went looking for this. This is what God wants me to do. Now, let me tell you a little bit about True the Vote. True the Vote does essentially three things. We provide training, we do research, and we provide support, all in the name of election integrity. Now, does that include trying to figure out where voter fraud is occurring? And ladies and gentlemen, is it occurring? Absolutely. Although I will take exception to what Ames said a little bit about the previous presidential election and how that was lost. Governor Romney was flat out played on many levels, not the least of which was the ground game. But the fraud is, at this point, baked into the system. It's not going to be, are there phantom ballots that are counted and that affect down ballot races and maybe even affect the presidential? Don't get me wrong, it's all possible, but I'm telling you, there is so much fraud baked into the system that unless you stay at this day in, day out, looking, lobbying, working and supporting good legislators to support good common sense election code reforms, we are not going to get where we need to be on election day in terms of overall free and fair process. It's too deep, and it's been a long time coming. There have been legislative action after effort like the George Soros Secretary of State project, after efforts like now we have navigators who are going out and making sure that if you sign up for Obamacare, you're also registered to vote. None of these things happen by accident. They're all funneling to a very, very intentional destination. So we provide training for people to go and work inside of the polls. God love the 10th Amendment. All of our states run that differently. And here in Oregon, it's different. It's different. But we train you as best as we can, given your state's laws. We believe that we need to have a trained poll watcher or worker inside of every single poll. That shouldn't be too much to ask, but sadly, across this country, we have about half the number of necessary volunteers. And what that leads to is states that just say, forget it, we're going to go to mail-in, all internet. Once you do that, you cannot unring that bell. That's gone. That's gone. All the checks and balances that were built in for us to have that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact, that's gone. That's why it's imperative that we preserve it now. So we provide that training. We provide research. Long story short, but where we are with research right now is we have roughly 180 million voter files. We can look at the nation's voter files and try to establish and identify trends and patterns, but we also use that for a number of other things, not the least of which is like when Governor Scott Walker was put in the crosshairs of a recall, and petitions were being gathered by a union called Wisconsin First, and they weren't checking signatures, and long and the short of it is we whipped that technology tool that we have around and created a process that crowdsourced all of those petition pages, and in 1 month, we had 23 million hits to our website. We have about 500,000 threats to try to take us down. And what we turned around was nothing short of stunning. Now, as it goes, the Government Accountability Board there in Wisconsin dismissed it, but the people didn't, and it has fundamentally changed politics in Wisconsin. The reason I point all of this out is I know when we hear, as Dr. Corsi was talking about, the technology. The technology, it's a challenge, but it's doable. What is more difficult is to recognize that the reason they have the technology that they do and the reason that they are mobilized like they are on the ground is because they are collectivists. That's what they do. Their God is government. We have got to get it in ourselves that it falls to each and every one of us now, not because we have a collectivist spirit, but because we recognize what is at stake, and because we have been chosen to be alive for such a time, we must get involved. And maybe it's not True the Vote. We hope every one of you signs up with True the Vote and volunteers, but maybe that's not your thing. Everybody, though, has their thing. You know, I think for too long, one of the reasons that we're in the situation that we're in is that for too long, we've lived lives of such comfort. You know, we've worked and we've raised our families and we've gone to church and we've done the volunteer bit. And we thought that that was enough, because then if we voted, those people would go into office and do what was necessary. It's like we were hiring the right people. You guys go do that and let us live our lives. That's over. That's over. Voting, just voting, sitting out there today and think, well, I vote, that's enough. It's not enough. Just voting is no longer enough. All of us now must reserve a little part of our lives for civic duty. And we have to do all the other stuff too, that oftentimes you find the left doesn't, because they're being paid by the government to do, with our tax dollars, to do a lot of the things that they do. Okay, that's unfair. It does not matter right now. We're in the thick of battle. We've got to get out there. And we've got to still raise our families and go to church and volunteer and work and do all those things, but we've got to save a little bit of ourselves back to civic duty. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we will return this country back to its former glory. All right, in closing, here's what I'll tell you. If we do stand up, that is the one thing that the left is not counting on. They do not believe, when push comes to shove, that we'd push back. True the Vote, pushing back. You need to be prepared to do the same. And wherever your interests lie, be prepared to stand strong, because you will be tested. And now is a season when you must know why you believe what you believe, and you must stand firm to that. Never, ever, ever lose hope. Never lose faith, and never forget for 1 second that God is still on the throne, still knows exactly what is happening, and we can make this turn around for His glory. Thank you all.